Chapter 6. The toughest part of the meat run is the butcher's shops. Because he has to go into the city, because he has to see Spaniel, because the heat of the concrete makes it hard to breathe, because he has to respect the curfew, because the buildings and the plazas and the streets remind him that there were once more people, a lot more. Before the transition, the butcher shops were staffed by poorly paid employees. They were often forced by the owners to adulterate the meat so it could be sold after it had begun to rot. When he worked at his father's processing plant, one employee told him, "What we sell is dead, it's rotting, and apparently people don't want to accept that." Between sips of mate, the man told him the secrets of adulterating meat so it looks fresh and doesn't smell. For packaged meat, we use carbon monoxide. The meat on display needs a lot of cold bleach, sodium bicarbonate, vinegar, and seasoning, a lot of pepper. People always confess things to him. He thinks it's because he's a good listener and isn't interested in talking about himself. The employee explained that his boss would make up for losses by buying meat that had been confiscated by the FSA, carcasses full of worms, and he'd have to work the meat and put them on sale. He explained that working the meat meant leaving it in the fridge for a long time, so the cold would get rid of the smell. He said that his boss forced him to sell diseased meat covered in yellow spots, which he had to remove. The employee wanted to leave to get a job at the Cypress processing plant since it had such a good reputation. He wanted to do honest work so he could support his family. He couldn't take the smell of bleach. The stench of rotting chicken made him vomit. He'd never felt so sick and miserable, and he couldn't look at customers in the eye. The women who were trying to make ends meet and asked for whatever was the cheapest to make breaded milanes for their children. If his boss wasn't there, he gave them whatever was freshest, otherwise he had to sell them the rotten meat. And afterwards, he couldn't sleep because of the guilt. This job was consuming him, little by little. The employee told him all this, and he talked to his father, who decided to stop selling meat to the butcher shop and hired a man to come and work for him. His father is a person of integrity. That's why he went crazy. He gets into his car and sighs, but right away he remembers going to see Spaniel and smiles, though seeing her is always complicated. While he's driving, an image bursts into his mind. It's the female in his barn. What is she doing? Does she have enough food? Is she cold? He has these thoughts and silently curses El Gringo. He arrives at Spaniel Butcher's and gets out of the car. The city's pavements are cleaner now that there are no dogs, and emptier. In the city, everything is extreme, raging. After the transition, the butcher shops closed down, and it was only later, once cannibalism had been legitimized, that some of them reopened. The new shops are exclusive and run by their owners, who demand extremely high-quality products. Few are able to open a second location, and those who do have a relative or someone they can absolutely trust run it. The special meat sold at butcher shops isn't affordable, which is why there's a black market to sell cheaper product that doesn't need to be inspected or vaccinated. That's easy meat with a first and last name. That's what illegal meat is called. Meat obtained and produced after the curfew, but it'll never be genetically modified and monitored to make it more tender, tasty, and addictive. Spaniel was one of the first to reopen her butcher shop. He knows she's indifferent to the world. The only thing she can do is slice meat, and she does this with the coolness of a surgeon. The vicious energy, the cold air in which smells are suspended, the white tiles intended to affirm hygiene, the apron stained with blood, it's all the same to her. For Spaniel, touching, chopping, grinding, processing, deboning, cutting up what was once breathing is an automatic task, but it's one done with precision. Hers is a passion that's contained, calculated. With special meat, it was necessary to adapt new cuts, new measures and weights, new tastes. Spaniel was the first and quickest to do so, because she handled meat with chilling detachment. Initially, she only had a few customers, the maids of the rich. But she had an eye for business, and opened the first butcher shop in the neighborhood with the greatest purchasing power. The maids picked up the meat, disgusted and confused, and always clarified that they'd been sent by the man or woman they worked for, as if doing so was necessary. Spaniel looked at these women with a grimace, but it was one of understanding, and the maids always came back for more, with increasing confidence, till finally they stopped giving explanations. Over time, the customers became more frequent. The fact that women ran the shop puts everyone at ease. But none of them knows what this woman thinks, except for him. He knows her well because she used to work at his father's processing plant. Spaniel says strange things to him while she smokes. He wants the visit to be over with as soon as possible because her intensity makes him uneasy, and Spaniel keeps him there. She does it every time, just like when he started working at his father's plant and she brought him to the cutting room after everyone had left. He thinks she doesn't have anyone to talk to, anyone to share her thoughts with. He also believes that Spaniel would be willing to lie down on the cutting table again, and that she'd be just as efficient and distant as she'd been when he wasn't yet a man. Or not. Now she'd be vulnerable and fragile, opening her eyes so that he could enter there beyond the cold. She has an assistant, a man he's never known to say a word. The assistant does the drudge work. He loads the carcasses into the cold storage room and cleans the shop. His gaze is like a dog's, full of unconditional loyalty and contained ferocity. He doesn't know the assistant's name since Spaniel never addresses the man, and when he's at the shop, El Perro, the dog generally makes himself scarce. At first, Spaniel copied the traditional cuts of beef so the change wouldn't be as abrupt. A customer would walk in, and it was like being in a butcher shop of times past. Over the years, the shop transformed, gradually but persistently. First, it was the packaged hands that Spaniel placed off on the side, where they were hidden among the milanesas a la Provençale, the cuts of tri-tip and kidneys. The label read special meat, but on other part of the package, Spaniel clarified that it was upper extremity, strategically avoiding the word hand. Then she added packaged feet, which were displayed on a bed of lettuce with the label lower extremity, and later on, platter of tongues, penises, noses, testicles, and a sign that said Spaniel's delicacies. Before long, people began to ask for front and hind trotters, using the cuts of pork to refer to upper and lower extremities. The industry took this as a permission and started to label products with these euphemisms that nullified all horror. Today, Spaniel sells brochetas made of ears and fingers, which she calls mixed brochetas. She sells eyeball liqueur and tongue a la vinaigrette. She leads him to a room at the back of the shop with a wooden table and 2 chairs. They're surrounded by fridges that hold half the carcasses she takes out of the cold storage room to slice then sell. The human torso is referred to as a carcass. The possibility of calling it half torso isn't contemplated. In the fridge there are also arms and legs. Spaniel asks him to take a seat and serves him a glass of foot-pressed wine. He drinks the wine because he needs it, so he can look her in the eye, so he doesn't remember the way she pushed him onto the table that was usually covered in cow entrails, but then was as clean as an operating table, and lowered his trousers without saying a word. The way she lifted her apron, which was still stained with blood, climbed onto the table where he lay naked, and carefully lowered herself, grabbing hold of the hooks used to move the cows. It's not that he thinks Spaniel is dangerous or crazy, or that he pictures her naked, because he's never seen her naked, or that he's only ever met a few female butchers and that all of them had been inscrutable, impossible to decipher. It's that he also needs the wine so he can listen to her calmly, because her words drive at his brain. They're frigid, stabbing words, like when she said no, and grabbed his arm and held them against the table forcefully after he tried to touch her, take off her apron, run his fingers through her hair. Or when he went up to her the next day and the only thing she said was goodbye, with no explanation, no kiss on her way out. Later he learned that she'd inherited a small fortune, which was how she bought the butcher shop. He hands her forms to sign that certify her interaction with the Krieg processing plant and state that she doesn't adulterate the meat. These are formalities because it's known that no one does. Not now, not with special meat. Spaniel signs the forms and takes a sip of wine. It's 10 in the morning. She offers him a cigarette and lights it for him. While they smoke, she says, "I don't get why a person's smile is considered attractive. When someone smiles, they're showing their skeleton." He realizes he's never seen her smile, not even when she took a hold of the hooks, raised her face, and cried out in pleasure. It was a single cry, a cry of both brutal and dark. "I know that when I die, somebody's going to sell my flesh on the black market. One of my awful distant relatives. That's why I smoke and drink, so I taste bitter and no one gets any pleasure out of my death." She takes a quick drag and says, "Today I'm the butcher, tomorrow I might be the cattle." He drowns his wine and tells her he doesn't understand. She has money and can ensure she's not eaten when she dies. A lot of people do. She gives him a look that could be pity. "No one can be sure of anything. Let them eat me. I'll give them horrible indigestion." She opens her mouth without showing her teeth and lets out a guttural sound that could be a cackle, but it isn't. "I'm surrounded by death all day long, at all hours of day," she says, and points to the carcasses in the fridge. "Everything indicates that my destiny is in there. Or do you think we won't have to pay for this? Then why don't you give it up? Why not sell the shop and do something else?" She looks at him and takes a long drag. For a while she doesn't say anything, as though the answer were obvious and doesn't need words. Then she exhales the smoke slowly and says, "Who knows, maybe one day I'll sell your ribs at a good price, but not before I try one." He drinks more wine and says, "You'd better. No doubt I'm delicious," and gives her a smile, showing off his skeleton. She looks at him with icy eyes. He knows she's serious, and that this conversation is prohibited, that these words would cause major problems for them, but he needs someone to say what no one does. The shop's doorbell rings. A customer. Spaniel leaves him to take care of business. El Perro appears and without looking at him gets a half carcass out of the fridge and takes it to a cold room with a glass door. He can see everything El Perro does. The man hangs the half carcass so it doesn't get contaminated. He removes the NMSA approval labels and begins to butcher the meat. He makes a fine cut into the ribs to remove a good piece of skirt steak. While he's watching El Perro, he thinks that he no longer knows the cut of meat by heart. During the adaptation process, many of the names of bovine cuts were carried over and mixed with those of pork. New directories were written up and posters were redesigned to show the cuts of special meat. The posters are never shown to the public. El Perro takes a saw and cuts the nape of the neck. Spaniel comes in and serves more wine. She sits down and says that the people are starting to order brains again. A doctor had confirmed that eating brains caused who knows what disease, one with some compound name, but now apparently other doctors and several universities have confirmed that's not the case. She knows the viscous mass can't be good for you if it's not inside your head, but she'll buy them and cut them into slices. "It's tough to do," she says, because they're quite slippery. She asks him if he can put in this week's order for her, but doesn't wait for his answer. She picks up a pen and begins to write. He doesn't clarify that she can order online. He likes to watch Spaniel write. She's silent, concentrating, serious. He looks at her closely while she finishes the order. The letters she writes squeeze tight together. Spaniel has an arrested beauty about her. It disturbs him that there's something feminine beneath the brutal aura that she takes great care to give off. There's something admirable in her artificial indifference. There's something about her he'd like to break.